I never expected my life to change because of a three-legged German Shepherd. But that's exactly what happened on the day Anson Whitaker walked into our clinic carrying 90 pounds of injured dog in his arms. My name is Lila, and I've been a veterinary nurse at Riverside Animal Hospital for the past 5 years. That Tuesday started like any other: coffee stains on my scrubs, a waiting room full of anxious pet parents, and the familiar antiseptic smell that never quite leaves your nose. Then he burst through the door. "Please, someone help. I found her on the side of the road," he called out, his voice steady despite the strain of carrying such a large dog. The shepherd's matted fur was caked with mud, and blood trickled from her rear leg. I rushed forward, already grabbing a gurney. "Over here. Put her down gently." Our eyes met briefly as we transferred the dog, and something flickered in my chest that I chose to ignore. There were more important things to focus on. "She's lost a lot of blood," I said, checking the dog's gums. "Dr. Morris, we need you in exam room 1, stat." The next hour was a blur of activity. The dog, whom Anson had started calling Hope, had been hit by a car. Her back leg was beyond saving, but the rest of her was strong. While Dr. Morris worked, I found myself stealing glances at Anson. He stayed the whole time, his expensive suit getting progressively more wrinkled as he paced the waiting room. "She's going to make it," I told him afterward. "But she'll need somewhere to recover." "I'll take her," he said without hesitation. "I have plenty of space at my house, though I might need some guidance." He smiled, and that same flutter returned to my chest. That's how I ended up giving my phone number to Anson Whitaker, supposedly just for post-operative care questions. I didn't know then that his mother, Meredith, was watching from her parked Mercedes across the street, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the steering wheel. Over the next few weeks, Anson's medical questions evolved into coffee dates and long walks with Hope, who was adapting remarkably well to life on 3 legs. He was different from anyone I'd ever met, genuine in a way that made his wealth seem almost incidental. Almost. It wasn't until the charity gala at the Whitaker Foundation that reality crashed in. I'd agreed to attend as Anson's date, wearing a borrowed dress that cost more than my monthly rent. That's when I overheard them, Meredith Whitaker and her friend, in the powder room, their voices carrying over the marble walls. "Really, Meredith, a veterinary nurse? I thought you had higher hopes for Anson than some girl who cleans up after animals for a living." "Don't worry," Meredith's voice was silk over steel. "These little diversions never last. The Whitakers have standards to maintain. We can't have outsiders thinking they can simply marry their way into proper society." My hands froze in the middle of washing them. Through the mirror, I caught Meredith's reflection as she adjusted her pearl necklace, her eyes meeting mine with calculated precision. She'd known I was there the whole time. I left the bathroom on shaking legs, my mind racing. Anson found me moments later, his face bright with excitement. "There you are. Come on, I want you to meet my grandmother Eleanor. She's the only one in this family whose opinion I actually care about." As he led me through the crowd, I couldn't stop thinking about Meredith's words. But more than that, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a simple clash of social classes. I had no idea then just how right I was, or that Hope wouldn't be the only one learning to stand strong on fewer legs than she started with. Meeting Eleanor Whitaker was nothing like I expected. While Meredith's words still echoed in my head, the family matriarch took one look at me and broke into a warm smile that reached her eyes. "So you're the one who helped save Hope," she said, reaching for my hands. "Anson hasn't stopped talking about you." The Whitaker Mansion's dining room could have swallowed my entire apartment whole. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow shadows across the mahogany table where we sat for what Anson had promised would be just a casual family dinner. Nothing about the Whitakers was casual. "Lila works at Riverside Animal Hospital," Anson said proudly, squeezing my hand under the table. "She's actually the one who taught me everything about caring for Hope." "A veterinary nurse," Meredith cut in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. How? Nurturing. Though I imagine the pay must be challenging, especially in this economy. I felt Anson tense beside me. Mother, I'm actually quite comfortable, I replied, matching her tone. There's something rewarding about work that makes a difference. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with interest. Indeed, I've always believed that true worth isn't measured by a bank account. Douglas, remember when you started as an intern at the company? Douglas Whitaker, Anson's father, looked up from his phone. Different times, Mother. The world expects more now. The world, Meredith added, sipping her wine, has standards. Speaking of which, Anson, the Prescott's daughter Caroline, is back from Europe. She's taking over their foundation's charitable division. That's nice, Anson replied flatly. I'm sure she and her trust fund will be very happy together. Tension in the room thickened. A maid appeared silently to clear our plates, and I noticed how Meredith barely acknowledged her existence. But Eleanor thanked her by name, Maria, and asked about her son's college applications. Lila, Eleanor said suddenly, would you help me fetch the dessert? Maria can take a break. In the kitchen, Eleanor's posture changed. My daughter-in-law means well, but she forgets where she came from sometimes. We all start somewhere. She handed me a crystal serving dish. Don't let her intimidate you, dear. I see how Anson looks at you. Before I could respond, we heard raised voices from the dining room. This isn't about Caroline, Anson was saying. This is about you trying to control my life like always. I'm trying to protect you, Meredith shot back. You have responsibilities, expectations. The only expectation I care about is being happy, Mother. Lila makes me happy. We returned to find Meredith standing, her hands pressed flat against the table. You've known her for what, 2 months? This infatuation will pass. Like yours did with Father? Anson's words cut through the air like a knife. The room went deadly quiet. Douglas finally looked up, his face dark. That's enough. I set down the dessert with shaking hands. I should go. Lila, wait! Anson started to follow me, but Eleanor caught his arm. Let her breathe, dear. Sometimes space is the kindest gift we can give. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with messages from Anson. But it was the last one that made me pull over. I'm sorry about tonight, but I want you to know I've never been more sure about anyone in my life. Meet me tomorrow at the clinic? Hope needs her checkup and I need to see you. I sat there, staring at my phone, when another message appeared, this one from an unknown number. Dear Lila, this is Eleanor. I saved your number from Anson's phone. There's something you should know about Meredith. Coffee tomorrow? Some stories are better told in person. My thumb hovered over the reply button. Whatever Eleanor knew, it could change everything. The question was, did I want it to? I thought about Meredith's smug smile, about Anson's defense of our relationship, about Eleanor's knowing looks. Maybe it was time to learn exactly what kind of family I was dealing with. I typed back, name the place and time. Eleanor chose a small cafe far from the Whitakers' usual haunts for our meeting. When I arrived, she was already there, looking less like the family matriarch and more like someone's favorite grandmother in her casual sweater and pearls. Hope trotted beside me, her 3-legged gait now confident and sure. Before we begin, Eleanor said, sliding a manila envelope across the table, you should know that showing you these could cause quite a stir in our family. Inside were photographs, old ones, their edges worn. A young woman in a waitress uniform stood outside a diner, her smile bright and determined. Took me a moment to recognize Meredith. Joe's Diner, 1985, Eleanor explained. That's where Douglas first met her. She was putting herself through community college, working double shifts. My coffee grew cold as Eleanor told me the story. How Meredith had grown up in a trailer park. How she'd reinvented herself after marrying Douglas, methodically erasing every trace of her past. How she'd even changed her accent. The society pages called it a Cinderella story, Eleanor said. But Meredith, she never stopped being afraid someone would discover her secret. She built walls around herself, around this family. And now she's terrified of history repeating itself, I finished, the realization hitting me hard. But why tell me this? Because you need to understand what you're dealing with. Meredith isn't just fighting you, she's fighting her own reflection. My phone buzzed. A text from Anson. Where are you? Mom's here at the clinic. Go, Eleanor said, reading my expression. But remember, sometimes the cruelest people are the ones most afraid of their own shadows. I rushed to the clinic, Hope keeping pace beside me. Through the window, I could see Meredith in her designer suit, speaking to my coworker Zoe. My stomach dropped. There you are. Zoe caught me at the door. Mrs. Whitaker's been asking about your employment history, and your family background, and your credit score. She what? I pushed through to find Meredith examining our medication storage with a critical eye. Ah, Lila. I was just discussing some concerns about the clinic's operations with your supervisor. Seems there might be some irregularities that the board should review. The threat was clear. She could damage not just my relationship with Anson, but my career too. Interesting timing, I said, keeping my voice steady. Especially since our last audit was perfect. But then you'd know all about reinventing yourself, wouldn't you? Meredith's perfectly composed face flickered. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Joe's Diner ring any bells? Color drained from her face. For a moment, I saw that waitress from the photograph, young, scared, desperate to belong. Then her walls slammed back up. Whatever you think you know. I know enough, I cut in. But here's the difference between us, Meredith. I'm not ashamed of where I came from, and I'm not afraid of where I'm going. You have no idea what it takes to survive in this world, she hissed. No, you have no idea what real survival looks like, I gestured to Hope, who sat watching us with wise eyes. It's not about hiding who you are. It's about adapting and moving forward, scars and all. Anson chose that moment to walk in. He looked between us, sensing the tension. Everything okay? Your mother was just leaving, I said, not breaking eye contact with Meredith. Unless there's something else she'd like to share? The threat hung in the air between us. Meredith's hand trembled slightly as she grabbed her purse. We'll continue this discussion later, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. After she left, Anson pulled me close. What was that about? I watched through the window as Meredith got into her Mercedes, her shoulders shaking slightly. The photographs felt heavy in my bag, a weapon I wasn't sure I wanted to use. Just two survivors sizing each other up, I said finally. But I think the real fight's just beginning. The manila envelope sat on my coffee table like a loaded gun. 3 days had passed since my confrontation with Meredith, and Anson had just texted to tell me he was coming over. We needed to talk, he said. Those words never meant anything good. Zoe perched on my couch, watching me pace. You could just show him the photos, she suggested. And this whole thing right now. And prove Meredith right? That I'm exactly the kind of person who'd destroy a family to get what I want. She's trying to destroy your career, Lila. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. A knock at the door made us both jump. Hope bounded over excitedly. She always knew when Anson was near. I opened the door to find him looking exhausted, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Hey, he said, then noticed Zoe. Oh, I didn't realize. I was just leaving. Zoe squeezed my arm as she passed. Remember what I said. Once we were alone, Anson collapsed onto the couch. Hope immediately put her head in his lap. Mother's called an emergency family meeting for tomorrow night. About us. What about us? She says she has concerns about your intentions. He wouldn't meet my eyes. She's been talking to people, digging into your past. My throat tightened. And She found out about your father's gambling debts, the bankruptcy when you were 16. The old shame rushed back. That was a lifetime ago. I know that. But she's convinced you're hiding something else. She's threatening to hire private investigators to expose whatever she finds to the clinic's board. Would you believe her? If she found something? Finally, he looked at me. Would there be anything to find? The envelope seemed to pulse with energy from its spot on the table. One move and I could end this, turn Meredith's weapon against her. But looking at Anson's face, I saw something that scared me more than Meredith's threats doubt. My phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. Meredith's planning something. Be careful at tomorrow's meeting. Remember, sometimes the best defense is letting your opponent defeat themselves. Lila. Anson's voice pulled me back. What aren't you telling me? I walked to the window, Hope following faithfully. Below, a black car idled across the street, one I'd seen before outside the clinic. Meredith wasn't just threatening investigations, she'd already started them. Your mother came from nothing, I said finally. Did you know that? What? No, she grew up in Connecticut, went to private schools. That's the story she tells. But it's not the truth. Anson stood up. What are you talking about? I turned to face him. If I told you I had proof that your mother's entire identity is a lie, would you want to see it? Or would you rather believe the comfortable story she's created? Are you threatening my mother? I'm asking if you want the truth, even if it hurts. He ran his hands through his hair. I don't know anymore. This whole situation. Maybe we should take a break. Give everyone time to calm down. The words hit like a physical blow. Hope whined, sensing my distress. If we step back now, she wins, I said. Is that what you want? I want peace in my family. His phone chimed. He checked it and his face hardened. I have to go. Mother needs me. After he left, I sat on the floor with Hope, her solid warmth anchoring me. The envelope still waited on the table, but now I saw it differently. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a test. Of me, of Anson, of what kind of person I wanted to be. I picked up my phone and texted Eleanor. I'll be at the meeting tomorrow. But we're doing this my way. Her response came quickly. Sometimes the greatest revenge is refusing to become what they expect you to be. I looked at Hope, who had overcome so much without losing her gentle spirit. Maybe that was the real lesson here. The Whitaker mansion felt different at night. Shadows crept across marble floors as I followed Maria, the housekeeper, to the study. She squeezed my hand before leaving, a small gesture of solidarity that meant everything. I'd left the envelope at home. Whatever happened tonight, it wouldn't be because I chose the nuclear option. The family was already assembled. Douglas behind his desk, Eleanor in her favorite armchair, Anson pacing by the window. Meredith stood when I entered, a folder in her hands and triumph in her eyes. Thank you for joining us, Lila. We have matters to discuss concerning the relationship with our family. Mother, please, Anson started. No, let her speak, I said, taking the only empty seat. I'm curious what else you've dug up about my past. Meredith's smile tightened. It's not just your past that concerns us. It's your present. Your sudden interest in our son, your convenient position at the clinic where wealthy clients bring their pets. She began laying out papers like playing cards. My father's bankruptcy documents, old eviction notices, a credit report. Each piece of my struggle laid bare like evidence of a crime. And now this, she said, producing a final document with flourish. An application for a small business loan submitted last week. How convenient that you'd seek to open your own veterinary practice just as your relationship with Anson grows serious. My heart stopped. I told no one about that application except Zoe. The loan officer had promised confidentiality. You're monitoring my financial records? The realization made me sick. We're protecting our family's interests. Douglas interjected, finally looking up from his phone. By breaking the law. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. Douglas, tell me you didn't authorize this. It doesn't matter how we obtained the information, Meredith pressed on. What matters is the pattern it reveals. A calculating young woman, using our son to elevate her station. Stop. Anson's voice was quiet but firm. Lila, is it true? The loan application? I met his eyes. Yes, 'cause I believe in building something of my own. Something no one can take away from me. How admirable, Meredith sneered. And I suppose my son's connection to several wealthy pet owners had nothing to do with your timing? That's enough. Eleanor stood, her frail frame somehow commanding the room. Meredith, you're so focused on protecting this family from outsiders that you can't see you're destroying it from within. Mother, please stay out of this, Douglas warned. No, I don't think I will. Eleanor moved to stand beside me. Lila, dear, would you like to tell them about the other document? The one you've been choosing not to show? Meredith's face flickered with uncertainty. I could, I said, watching Meredith carefully. But I don't think I need to. 'Cause this isn't about me, is it, Meredith? It's about you and what you're afraid I'll become. Or maybe what you're afraid I already am, a mirror. Color drained from Meredith's face. For a moment, I saw that young waitress again, desperate to belong. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered, but her hands were shaking. Grandmother. Anson looked between us, confusion evident. What's going on? Before anyone could respond, Douglas's phone rang. He answered, listened, then looked at me with something like respect. The loan application, he said. It's been approved. Not by any of our family's banks, but by a small credit union in Connecticut. He turned to Meredith. Your hometown, isn't it, dear? The silence that followed was deafening. Meredith gripped the edge of the desk, her carefully constructed world teetering on the brink. I think, Eleanor said gently, it's time we all told the truth. The whole truth. I stood up, my decision made. No, I think it's time I left. Some truths need to be told by the people who've lived them. As I walked out, Anson called after me. But I kept going, Hope's lessons about survival echoing in my mind. Sometimes moving forward means letting go of the need to win. Behind me, I heard Meredith begin to cry. 3 days after I walked out of the Whitaker mansion, Anson proposed. Not with a carefully planned speech or expensive dinner, but in the clinic parking lot. Rain soaking through our scrubs after treating an emergency case together. Should have been perfect. Instead, it felt like the beginning of the end. The engagement party at the Whitaker estate was Meredith's idea. One last chance, she'd said, her voice hollow, to do things properly. She hadn't spoken about that night in the study, and neither had I. The photos remained hidden in my apartment, a loaded gun I couldn't bring myself to fire. I should have known better. The ballroom sparkled with crystal and old money. Hope wasn't allowed inside. Not appropriate for such an occasion, Meredith had insisted. I felt her absence like a missing limb. You look uncomfortable, Eleanor observed, appearing beside me. Like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Aren't I always with this family? She squeezed my hand. Meredith's been unusually quiet these past few days. Be careful. I spotted Anson across the room, surrounded by his parents' friends. Caught my eye and smiled, but didn't come over. We'd barely spoken since the proposal, both pretending everything was fine. Then Meredith clinked her glass for attention. I'd like to propose a toast, she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. To new beginnings. To truth. To family. My stomach dropped. Eleanor gripped my arm. Many of you know how protective I am of my son, Meredith continued. How I've always wanted the best for him, which is why it pains me to do this. She nodded to Douglas, who pressed a button. The ballroom screens lit up with security camera footage me entering my apartment building late at night. with James Harrison, one of the clinic's wealthy clients. Taken last week, Meredith announced. And the week before that. Always late at night, always when Anson was away on business. The room erupted in whispers. I stood frozen, remembering those nights, the emergency calls about Harrison's sick dog, the late-night treatments, confidential discussions about investing in my future clinic. "Mother, stop this," Anson's voice cut through the chaos. But he wasn't looking at me. "The timing of her loan approval is interesting, isn't it?" Meredith pressed on. "Right after these." Meetings began. "It's not what you think," I started, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "What I think," Meredith's voice turned sharp, "is that you've been playing us all. Using my son while securing your future with one of our oldest family friends." "James Harrison is my business partner," I finally managed. "He's investing in my clinic because he believes in my work. That's all. Is that why you kept these meetings secret? Why you never mentioned them to Anson?" I looked at Anson, saw the doubt in his eyes. "I wanted to tell you, but after everything with your mother, I was afraid. Afraid we'd see the truth?" Meredith smiled. "Well, now everyone can see it." The room spun. I saw the judgment in their faces, heard the whispers. Even Douglas looked away. "Enough." Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. "Meredith, you've gone too far." But Meredith wasn't finished. "I have the contract here signed last week. A very generous investment with some interesting conditions about future client relationships." She was twisting everything, turning my dream into something dirty. And Anson still hadn't moved. I walked to the center of the room, facing Meredith directly. "You want to talk about secret meetings? Secret contracts? Should we discuss Joe's Diner, Meredith? Should we talk about where you really came from?" The room went deadly quiet. Meredith's face drained of color. "Go ahead," she whispered. "Show them. Prove exactly what kind of person you are." I felt the weight of every eye in the room. Saw Eleanor's sad smile, Douglas's calculating gaze, Anson's confusion. In that moment, I understood I could win this battle, but I'd lose everything that mattered. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the ballroom. Behind me, I heard Anson call my name, but I didn't stop. Some victories aren't worth the cost of winning. I found Meredith in the garden, exactly where Eleanor said she'd be. She stood among her precious roses, still wearing her party dress, though the perfectly styled hair had come undone. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands. "Come to finish what you started," she asked without turning around. "To expose me to everyone who's left? Most of them already left after your performance." I moved closer, watching her shoulders tense. "But that's not why I'm here." She laughed, brittle and sharp. "Then why? To gloat? To tell me how I've become everything I feared? To give you these?" I held out the envelope. "They belong to you." Finally, she turned. Her mascara had left dark trails down her cheeks, but her spine was still steel straight. "I don't want your pity." "Good, because this isn't pity. This is me choosing to be better than what you tried to make me." A noise from the terrace made us both turn. Anson stood there, watching. Behind him, Eleanor and Douglas emerged from the shadows. They must have followed me. "What's going on?" Anson asked, his voice uncertain. Meredith's hand shook as she took the envelope. "Nothing that concerns." "Everything," Eleanor cut in. "Everything that's happened concerns all of us." "Open it, Meredith." "It's time." The photos spilled out, scattering across the garden path. Young Meredith in her waitress uniform. The diner. The trailer park. A life she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it never existed. "I worked every shift I could get," Meredith whispered, picking up one photo. "Saved every penny. Changed my accent, my clothes, my entire life. And then you met Father," Anson said, realization dawning in his eyes. "I loved him," Meredith's voice cracked. but I loved what he represented more: security, respect, never having to feel ashamed again. "So you became someone else entirely," I said quietly. "And when you saw me with Anson, I saw myself. Everything I'd run from, everything I'd fought to forget." She looked at me directly for the first time. "I couldn't let you do to him what I did to Douglas." "What you did to me?" Douglas stepped forward. "Meredith, I fell in love with that waitress who worked double shifts and dreamed of something better. Not this performance you've been putting on for 30 years. You knew." Meredith's voice was barely a whisper. "I've always known. I thought eventually you'd trust me enough to be yourself again." He picked up one of the photos. "I miss her sometimes." Anson moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. "All this time you were fighting your own reflection in Lila. But she's nothing like you, Mother. She never hid who she was. Even when you gave her every reason to be ashamed, she stood her ground." "The meetings with James Harrison," I added softly, "were about creating something of my own. Not because I wanted to escape who I am, but because I'm proud of who I've become." Despite everything, Meredith sank onto a garden bench, the photos scattered around her like fallen leaves. "I don't know how to be that person anymore. The one who wasn't afraid." "Then maybe," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm, "it's time to learn again. Starting with the truth about why you really fought so hard against Lila." "Because she's everything I couldn't be," Meredith whispered. "Strong enough to be herself no matter what anyone thinks." The garden fell silent except for the distant sound of departing cars. The last of the party guests, leaving with fresh gossip about the Whitaker family drama. "What happens now?" Anson asked, his thumb tracing circles on my hand. I looked at Meredith, saw the scared young woman beneath the polished exterior. "Now we all decide who we want to be, not who we think we should be." Meredith stood slowly, gathering the photos with trembling hands. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No," I agreed. "But maybe we both deserve a chance to start over." The night air shifted, carrying the scent of roses and possibility. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in destroying your enemy, but in refusing to let them destroy themselves. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of my new clinic, watching Meredith struggle with Hope's leash. The German Shepherd had taken to her weekly therapy sessions with surprising enthusiasm, though I suspected it had more to do with the treats Meredith smuggled in her designer handbag than any medical necessity. "She's favoring her right side again," Meredith noted, her once perfect manicure now slightly chipped. She'd started volunteering at the clinic 3 months ago, much to everyone's surprise, especially her own. "Dogs are good at reading people," I said, checking Hope's gait. "They know when someone's trying to change." The bell chimed as Eleanor entered, followed by Douglas. They'd become regular fixtures here, Eleanor with her business advice and Douglas with his unexpected talent for calming anxious pets. "The contractor finally finished the renovation plans," Douglas announced, spreading blueprints across the reception desk. "The old diner's structure is solid. It just needs updating." Meredith's hands stilled on Hope's fur. "Joe's Diner? That's where you're opening the second location." "It seemed fitting," I replied, watching her carefully. "A place for new beginnings." She was quiet for a moment then. "The coffee was terrible there, but the pie was something special." "I remember," Douglas said softly. The door chimed again. Anson walked in, still in his surgical scrubs from the hospital where he'd started volunteering. He'd discovered a passion for veterinary medicine that surprised everyone except me. "Ready for lunch?" he asked, kissing my cheek. "Mom, you're coming too, right? That little Italian place you used to work at?" Meredith tensed, then relaxed. "I haven't been there in 30 years. I wonder if Marco still makes those garlic knots." "Only one way to find out," Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling. As they headed out, I stayed behind to finish some paperwork. Through the window, I watched them walk together, Meredith and Douglas hand in hand, Eleanor sharing some story that made them all laugh. Hope trotting alongside like she'd always belonged. Zoe appeared beside me, sorting through patient files. Still can't believe how things turned out, huh? Sometimes the happy ending isn't what you expect, I said, touching my engagement ring, a simple band Anson had reproposed with. This time in the clinic where we'd met, Hope as our witness. Speaking of unexpected, Zoe hesitated. Meredith asked me about taking some vet tech classes at the community college. Said something about it never being too late to be who you might have been. I smiled. Remembering the photos now proudly displayed in the Whitaker home, young Meredith in her waitress uniform next to recent ones of family dinners and clinic events. No more hiding, no more shame. The mail arrived, bringing the usual mix of bills and business correspondence. But one envelope stood out, cream-colored, expensive paper. Inside was an invitation to the annual Whitaker Foundation Gala. But this year was different. The cause? A scholarship program for veterinary students from underprivileged backgrounds. The location? The newly renovated Joe's Diner. A note fell out, written in Meredith's elegant hand. Some debts can never be repaid, but perhaps they can be passed forward. Thank you for showing me that the person I was running from was the person I needed to become again. M. I tucked the invitation away, thinking about revenge and redemption, about the ways we hurt people by hurting ourselves, about how sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone find their way back to themselves. Hope barked outside, impatient for me to join the others for lunch. Through the window, I saw Meredith laugh, a real laugh, unguarded and free. She caught my eye and nodded, a gesture of understanding between two women who had learned that the strongest foundations are built on truth, not pretense. I grabbed my coat and headed out. After all, I had a family waiting for me, and they were exactly the kind of imperfect I'd always needed them to be. Needed them to be. Needed them to be. Needed them to be. Needed them to be.